Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show's Reading Rangers.
He noticed objects moving in the sky overhead. They were yellow and red and moving fast, falling at a steep angle toward the skyline. And then he noticed that they were throwing out something as they fell, two small things in pairs. He narrowed his eyes and realized that he was looking at parachutes, a cloud of brightly colored parachutes, making for a patch of flat ground covered in white markings. He watched as one of the parachutes came to Earth, the person beneath it touching down and sprinting furiously toward the green line of the horizon.
Yeah. Well, I'm Shaun.
I'm Daniel.
And on today's show, we're discussing Sleep Phase by Mohamed Kheir, translated from the Arabic by Robin Moger, or Moger, I'm not 100% on that, and available now from Two Lines Press, which is a small press doing lots and lots of translation in which you should support.
Before we get into our discussion, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfancy.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. Finally, be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be a part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watches, or other special Patreon-only events on Discord. And it's only $1 a month to take part.
It's really cheap, by the way. Also, if we hit $100 a month, which we are $21 short of at the moment, right? So only 21 people at $1. I have been voluntold I must live watch Cats 2019 while reacting to it and streaming it in the Discord. I don't want to do this.
And,
just to be clear.
Expect it'll be quite a reaction too.
It's going to be pain incarnate because
yes.
I've watched more about this movie than the actual movie itself. Anyway, moving on. But on happier notes, so we're going to talk about Sleep Phase. And so, Daniel, tell me about it. What is this thing about?
So, Sleep Phase takes place in Cairo, Egypt, Alexandria too. But Warif is released from prison after a 7-year stint in prison, and he comes out to find a Cairo that is very changed from when he first went in. And so he notices that streets look different, stores and shops are gone and replaced by more like foreign chain stores. There are a lot of expatriates around, fewer Egyptian nationals, more international in flair and more cookie cutter. And so as he tries to navigate his newfound freedom in an Egypt that is sort of grappling with newfound freedoms as well, he is trying to get back some semblance of his former job from prior to his getting arrested, which was as a translator. However, he keeps getting told that he doesn't need to get a job, that other people are doing jobs, and so he's just going to get a salary basically for doing absolutely nothing. That sounds like a dream. Why don't you just do that then? Get money for nothing. But he, is confused by this and wants to actually work and do something for the money that he's getting. And so this new life that he comes out to, he's a bit traumatized from his time in prison, begins having panic attacks and not really understanding this world he is entered into and getting confused by it. His main human contacts are a woman that he's had a relationship with from prior, before his arrest, named Sally, and his best friend, who is named Wagdi.
Wagdi, I believe, yeah.
Yes. And so they're his main sort of found anchors to both his former life and trying to navigate this strange new life. but he finds it increasingly difficult to do that, and at the same time, sort of reality starts merging into more of a dreamlike, surreal fantasy as well. And he begins courting the idea of madness. And that's sort of vague. It's not a very plot-heavy book, but it's filled with big ideas, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that this is a book that I don't know that we could spoil it no matter how much we talk about its specific details, because
correct.
It's the type of book where the plot, such as there is one, is not its main object or concern. More of I would say the prose is a huge component in this. I have no idea what it is like to hear this and read this in Arabic, but the translation is remarkable.
I'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. The translation is remarkable, I will say. And it is definitely about the way the ideas coalesce and come together, how it is explored and explained when the book presents new details. And I think if you're seeing my book in the video, you will see all of my color-coded gizmos, little, I don't remember what those things are called, the little tags or whatever. And that's because literally from the first chapter...
The little post-it.
The post-it thingies, the little post-it sticky gizmos. Literally from the very beginning, when I started reading this, I was like, oh, there are going to be some core themes in this book, and I should start marking down the most important ones. And so this is all color-coded in here.
There are a lot.
Yes. And that's because I have... My pink ones are for... not literally every instance, but the very important instances when he talks about the ways the world has changed, right? Where Warif is talking about that. The green ones are when anything that comes up that feels like bureaucracy or the oppressiveness of the world that he was in or is currently in. I've got a section here that's about like language and the way we think changes, very specific ones. And then one that's just about his mental state, which is like this other color I have in here. And that's because those seem to be four of the most important components running through the book. And so when I say, like, I don't think you can spoil this book, that's because I think if you read this, which details leap out to you are going to be a little bit different depending on you as the reader and how you read and engage with the work and its sometimes meandering, almost stream of consciousness thoughts in some parts, I think is going to be very dependent on the reader as well, which I would not say about necessarily any book that we might read for Reading Rangers where that may not be the case.
It's also not linear in its presentation. It sort of, like you said, meanders. Like, it reminds me somewhat of his previous novel that I read of his that was translated into English, Slipping, which is sort of a meandering around Cairo as well, and even more goes into the sort of surreal, dreamlike or fantasy-like elements, including walking on water, these giant flowers, various situations like that. This has a similar sort of style to it as well. In terms of spoilers, the one thing I sort of flirted with, do I mention in sort of my summary or not, is the reason for his arrest. It's not really a spoiler per se, but it does, you don't really find out why he was arrested or the details of it until like midway through the book, roughly.
Just about.
And it does have huge significance, though.
Yes.
To one of those themes that you were talking about having color-coded. And so there is a significance to it, and we'll probably end up talking about it. But that's the only sort of detail that I could think about when I was thinking about a summary of, like, do I talk about it? Do I not? Because it is sort of, you begin reading this wondering why he was in prison, what he did. And there are some clues that occur, but you don't really definitively find, until that roughly halfway point. Yeah,
you're completely correct. And that one maybe we talk towards the end. Because I think it's a very interesting detail. I guess the big thing that I want to talk about then to get us kind of started would be talking about that idea of change. Because it is something that you brought up very clearly right at the beginning of the sort of summary of the book. And it is something I know you've got notes out in the script about, because one of the like immediate things that becomes very clear in this is that he's come back to a world where Cairo is not the place that he remembers, and there's very distinct ways that that's manifested. One of the details that really stood out to me, and you used that phrase cookie cutter, and I'm glad you used that, because there's several references throughout about references to like chains and Western stylings, and the absence that where he notices of things that he remembers from when he was younger, and which he describes in somewhat contradictory ways, because he sort of presents them as being, in some degrees, sort of like, I don't want to say dirty, because that makes it seem more negative than how he describes it, but like rough around the edges, or like, it's like a cafe, but it's, people sitting like in the dirt, or sitting in the grass, or, it's in the desert, or these kinds of very specific images.
Distinct and traditional characters to it.
Yes, I would agree.
For the area, right?
Yes, yeah. It feels to some degree like he's thinking back to the differences in the way that those things he remembers are presented and what makes them so different, but he's not describing them as negatives. But he doesn't necessarily do that with the changes either. He doesn't say
they're just shocking to him.
Right, he's shocked by it, and he talks about how there's all these things that have cropped up. What I got through that we got successive changes, was this sense of almost like conflict, of being conflicted about how are we supposed to really feel about this? Because in some ways the changes are good, right? In some ways the things he's describing, right, things that were very far apart that are beautiful are closer together. Things that used to be sort of inaccessible are now accessible because of the changes that have occurred. And there's certainly more stuff that previously wouldn't have existed, and people have access to some things they didn't have before. But it also means all of that. Exactly, yeah. But of course, all of that stuff that that we kind of have that nostalgia for, about the way things used to be, and that very traditional way that he describes those things, like hookah and these kinds of elements where people would just sort of have that casual local experience. A lot of that is sort of gone, and in some ways, in very stark ways. So I found a lot of conflict throughout the book between those two elements, sort of remembering the past and the change that has occurred, where the change is not inherently, it's not wicked or evil, it's not inherently horrific or bad, but it is also not necessarily, it's not utopian, even though at times the book wants to kind of suggest that it might be leaning that way. I don't think it is utopian. I think it's conflicted.
Correct. Yeah. And it's interesting because there's sort of an irony there too in Cairo's history. Because from the very first pages, I had to look up a word, exactly what it was referring to, but it was a distinct, period architectural style to the buildings in Cairo. The word, I forget it now, but relates to one of the rulers that was responsible for making that. And I fell down the rabbit hole of looking into this and saw that Cairo was originally designed by someone from France, and designed very particularly to resemble Paris. And so there's already sort of baked into the nation, into the city, these foreign elements.
Yeah.
That are sitting on top of, a very ancient, well-known ancient culture, right? And ancient civilization. And so it's this weird conflicting hodgepodge that I think is very characteristic, at least my understanding, of Egyptian society today, of this mixture of the modern, the ancient, the native, the European, all sort of intermingled into this mix, and it's always fluctuating and changing. And that's what makes it so discombobulating to Warif, is he gets out, after 7 years gone. That's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. And as we learned, right, that the changes are quite stark in some respects, right? Entire roads been like bulldozed away and replaced, or he talks very early in the book about like these alleys that you would just like go down and there'd be a door in like a cafe or someone's house or whatever, and you just go down the alley and like there was an experience to be had there, and those are gone in some cases, right? There's so much of the character of the city that has been disappeared, but one of the sacrifices, while that's a sacrifice, the thing that he describes as the thing that led to this, or if that's what led to it, question mark, we'll get to later, right? But part of the complaint that in that old world is sort of all of these seedy elements of the city that make life there difficult, or make life uncomfortable, because Warif was like he like helped tourists at some point, right? And that creates all kinds of conflicts because there's an element of like, this is a country that is going through a lot of strife and difficulty, hence why he gets arrested, but we won't get to the specifics about that just yet. That leads to this very feeling of like change is necessary, but the change that we get is so extreme here that it almost feels, I think like the panic attacks that he experiences sometimes feel like he's been suffocated in prison, but he's also to some degree being suffocated by this new world, because it's so starkly different from what he's used to, right?
And what I found interesting is that Mohamed Kheir's descriptions of the city, and really all of his prose, is filled of, it's like a sensory experience.
Yes.
And it's part of his panic attacks, I think, of why it's so shocking and so stark, is that he's almost being assaulted in all of his senses. It's not just sight, like knowing something looks different. Things sound completely different, right?
Yeah.
The languages being spoke are different that he hears coming in. The sounds of the city, of the vehicles, the smell of what food is being made compared to the food. Like now there's tacos, where there used to be a cart that had a more traditional type of food being served. It's all those senses are hitting him all at once.
I agree. Yeah. It's like overload. The way the prose works, and it's gorgeous prose, by the way. It was so engrossing to get sort of lost in his sentences and just all of these details that sometimes I felt a little overwhelmed a little bit, but in a good way. I felt like that was it was like a text where I felt it was a little difficult and I had to really sort of engage with the words. I couldn't just read it and then just move on. I had to like really like suck it in. But the way the prose works in this, there's so many moments where quite literally a scene will be, he's like in a cafe or somewhere, right? Just doing a normal activity. And then the paragraph will shift suddenly into some memory or some traumatic experience or a recollection, or I would call them like pontifications or visions of something, right? It could be a variety of different things that happen. And that creates this very sort of discombobulating way that the story progresses, that you feel that as the characters experiencing it, because it takes a second for you to kind of go, oh, whoa, we're not in the same place anymore. I think of the example when he's meeting with, he calls her the pale woman, and I think later almost refers to her as translucent, right? Because there are all these like people in charge of things that are, I guess they're foreigners, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. Right. And
the bureaucracy that you mentioned.
Yeah. The bureaucracy. Yeah. And he's talking to her, and they're having, I guess I would call a normal conversation. And in the middle of it.
It starts that way.
It starts that way. And in the middle of it, he just immediately starts going back to all of this prison experience he had, and like the sense of frankly insanity that he began to experience in it. Because I think that's the scene when he's describing what it was like to be shuffled around and not knowing where. It's either that one or it's the one where he first talks about getting.
I think it's when he It's when he first talks about getting on the bus.
Yes, yeah, you're
and
right.
There's a bunch of, and all the other people arrested look just like him, are all the same height.
Yes, because
I could have been his brother, and
yes, because I tagged that because he keeps saying in every interview he's gone, because he's trying to get this job and he has to go through these interviews, right? He keeps saying that this thing that he thought once that may or may not be linked to what's going on. I'm being super cagey. I'm sorry. He keeps saying it's just coincidence, right? It's just coinky-dink. It's just like nature. Like sometimes there's, I can't remember what they're called, synchronicities, basically. He's like describing synchronicities, right? And what I found really interesting in that scene is that towards the end, when he finally comes back from his memory, and he's saying, well, maybe the reason I was arrested is because we were all like the same person. And she's like, well, maybe the reason you all look the same is because you just happened to get arrested at the same. It's like, it's a coincidence. Yes. And my immediately thought was like, this is the author being very clever, because isn't it funny how he's getting a coincidence answer the same way he's given her coincidence answers? And then his response to that is, but maybe you, the people that have been here, were responsible. And isn't it convenient that you like showed up just when things changed? And I thought that was such a clever sequence of events. There's so much depth just in that chapter. There's so much going on, and you could really just unpack it for a while. But I love there's like what to me felt like there was a little bit of a joke happening there.
Yes. There is a humor that suffuses all of this as well. That kind of if I can step back for a moment. In terms of, you might disagree with me, but in terms of sort of the vibes that Mohamed Kheir gives to me, to place it for someone who is familiar with genre, maybe, it's very reminiscent to me of Gene Wolfe's writing, particularly his later novels that were sort of very surreal and dealt with bureaucracy and uncertainties as well. Gene Wolfe meets Terry Gilliam.
I could see that.
Arabic.
But Arabic.
An Egyptian writer writing Gene Wolfe and Terry Gilliam. Like, that's sort of the mixture. The book, the blurb for the book compares it to Kafka. Which, I don't get Kafka so much from this.
I guess, like, thematically I could kind of get it, but the thing I keep latching onto is, what is the prose like? And Kafka's not... Well, no, I haven't read every Kafka, so maybe there's some weird stuff where he goes really
Not that I've read, no.
But I would say it's Kafka-esque in its surrealist, and in some cases absurdist elements. But I don't know, that seems like...
stylistically, it seems much more like those later Wolfe novels to me than Kafka. But
interesting. Even on the prose styling, or you just mean like the way the story?
No,
even
in the prose as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the fluidity particularly. I don't know about I would not say the poetic nature. So Mohamed Kheir is a lyricist, and so there's a musicality to his writing that Robin Moger excels at being able to translate. That's so I'll slip into that sort of history. Back, it was during the pandemic, I guess, or soon after, Two Lines Press was publishing the debut translation of Slipping, which was the previous and only other novel that I know of translated into English by Mohamed Kheir. And for that event, they had a special Zoom meeting that you could attend where they had a presentation both by Robin Moger and by Mohamed Kheir. So they both appeared. And during it, Robin spoke and Mohamed spoke, and Robin translated for Mohamed as well. And they talked about the writing of Slipping, and sort of Mohamed talked about his experiences being a lyricist and writing music and poetry, because that's primarily, he's a poet and lyricist. Which really shows in his prose.
Well, he's a novelist now, so.
Then Robin Moger, he read his translation. I guess it was first Mohamed Kheir read the original in Arabic. which if you've heard Arabic's a very musical, wonderful,
it's a beautiful
sounding language. And so it was beautiful just not understanding personally Arabic. It was beautiful just hearing Mohamed Kheir reading this passage from Slipping. But then right after Robin Moger, he read his translation of it and then talked a little bit about how he was trying to capture the lyricism in things. And it was just brilliant and equally beautiful. And so that's why I was so excited to see Sleep Phase now released, and that Robin Moger was translating that as well. So that's a bit of the history of, so that poet sort of aspect, I wouldn't say Gene Wolfe has, but in terms of the unreliable things that occur, the uncertainties of where the narrative is going, what is dream, what is reality, those sorts of things remind me of Wolfe.
Interesting. The prose reminds me, if Thomas Pynchon was more lyrical, if that makes sense. Or if you were going to go with the Kafka reference, I would say Kafka funneled through Thomas Pynchon. Just because of the very free-flowing, extensive writing. Even Salman Rushdie has some of this in some of his writing, especially like Midnight's Children, which is an exceptional book. If you want to do it for the show, I would love to do it because it's so cool.
We should do that.
It's such a good book, but it is intense, and your mind will melt. And remember, it's 3 times as long as this one. So, so this book melts your mind, short. But like it's 180 something pages, and so by the time your mind is putty, like you have time to put it back together again. But I guess the thing I'm getting at is, I can see where that lyricism is here. And Moger does capture that in a. Honestly, I want Brandon to read this because Brandon is a poet, very extensively so, poet laureate right now, right? And I would love to see Brandon sort of tackle that prose because it is so well constructed in this. I mean, I really, really got to say, Mohamed Kheir, exceptional writer. Like, absolutely, this is probably my favorite book of the year right now. I absolutely freaking love this book. It's so good. And Robin Moger. So
next book they put out, we should just have those two on the show then.
If we could do that, I would love to talk to them about this because I don't know how Robin Moger does it because I can't read Arabic at all, like none, zilch. And so when I'm reading this, I'm relying on a translator basically to give me something that approximates what that book is like in my language. And I don't know, since I can't read the Arabic, I don't know exactly how effectively it was captured, although some of what you were suggesting seems to be that it was captured very well. But I can say that, right, if it's this good in English by this exceptional translator, like Egypt is like, y'all lucky. You get to read this in Arabic too. Like that, this is so good. And Moger's so good as a translator. Mohamed Kheir, Nobel Prize. Let's just go. I know I'm just gushing, and it's because like the experience of reading this. I mean, I don't do this for every book we read. It's not because those books are bad, right? With these little tags for those that aren't watching. It's just that something about this book like just like reached into me and like wouldn't let go. I mean, I want to be clear. I read this whole thing today. One day in an afternoon, I just couldn't stop. That hasn't happened to me in a long time. I just need to be clear, right? I forced myself to read books. They were good books, but the last time I just started reading a book and I was like, oh, I don't know, am I going to be able to finish this in time? And then being like, well, crap, they could have made this longer. You know? Sorry, I'm gushing. Please, you take over. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So one of the notes that I had made that we haven't really talked much about are the other characters in the book. There's really only 3. There's the side characters like the pale woman that you mentioned, but the 3 sort of main central ones are Warif, Sally, and now I'm forgetting his name again.
Wagib.
I
think it's that. Yeah.
3. Wagdi.
Excuse me. Wagdi.
I'm typing it in here just so I don't forget it again. Wagdi. So we have Warif, Sally, and Wagdi. And one of the things that I found interesting thematically was that Warif and Sally both are individuals who can pass for European. Warif is described as very light-skinned. Mm-hmm. Sally, I think her full name is Sally Adams, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
She, as her name would indicate, she is not fully Egyptian.
Right, she's European she is half Egyptian. As she's described.
Yeah, European Egyptian. And so they both present similar to more foreign European elements, or at least can pass for ones. Wagdi, not to my recollection, is not described in that way.
I don't believe so.
The book brings up several times sort of the privilege that comes in their society at being able to navigate between European and Egyptian worlds, particularly Warif and his job as a translator and working with tourists, and being able to get by, Sally working in a bank. Yet it doesn't end up saving Warif in his quest for a job once the sort of regime change happens. He can pass, but he's not foreign enough for what Egypt has become. And I don't know, maybe you can elaborate more on this, Shaun, if you have thoughts. It's sort of a thing that I picked up being mentioned in the book several times, but it is one of those threads that I had a hard time figuring out what exactly Mohamed Kheir is trying to say. With those, other than just sort of rounding out or enriching the character with details, but how that fit as a sort of thread or puzzle piece into the broader picture, I was not quite as certain on, at least through a first read.
I think the things that kind of stood out to me about these kinds of elements was this, there's like an alienation effect that's happening here at pretty astonishing degrees. And here are these characters who, at least for our main character and what is effectively the second main character, they're presented to me as being outside pretty much no matter where they are. And they're sort of beset upon by being alienated to some degree from their originating culture and being alienated from this new thing that has emerged. But not totally, right? Because they're not in the sense of like they're not allowed to be part of these cultures. It's just that these cultures aren't necessarily theirs. I mean, the image that sits out to me with Sally in particular is when they meet all of her like friends, and it turns out like Jacob's the one that has his job, which awkward a little bit, right? But that group that Sally finds herself in, her friends, are pretty much all foreigners to Egypt. They're not originally from Egypt. Two of them have a connection to Egypt through family, but they're not themselves really Egyptian in the sort of traditional sense of Egyptian, in the way that Warif is, who is at least born there. And so it seems very clear that even in this new culture, this new thing that has emerged, right, itself is so far beyond what was the old form that these people you would think would immediately just fit in. They're even seen as outsiders.
They're still not fitting in.
They still don't fit in. Right. Sally has her friends who are overwhelmingly, I mean, presumably they were her friends before, right? But they're overwhelmingly foreigners, right? She's with expat groups. She's hanging out in expat communities. She's not hanging out with the people that, to some degree, right, her mixed race heritage makes her not really welcome in, as Warif gives us, the translucent people and the unplaceable man, right? They're these people that are so they're described as alien almost, like literally, like almost like aliens. And so, yeah, to me, that's what I thought was being suggested here, is this new world, even this new world, for all of the desires it presents to these people. This may be where eventually we're going to just have to explain what Warif thinks he might be responsible for this. All of those desires that they want about the world that accepts them still won't accept them for who they are, which is kind of depressing now that I think about it.
Yet Wagdi is from the more traditional side, right? He's
Correct.
Born there, has a family, all from Egypt.
Yeah.
He's the only one, right? He's married, he has a wife, he has 2 children.
And he fits in.
And he fits in.
Right? He even stands in.
He fit in before, he still fits in, he stands in, right.
Yeah, and he
hasn't had that break
with...
he hasn't had that break from society.
Right. He's still very traditional, and Warif, I think, still wants some of that tradition. He still loves that tradition. Wagdi is his best friend, as he's described. But it is very interesting that he can't seem to find but part of it's because he went to prison. So like he went mad in prison, right? There's a whole thing about that we might talk about.
He courted madness.
He courted madness on purpose, which fair point. I would probably do that, being locked in was it like a 1 meter by 1.5 meter cell or something? Yeah. So pretty small. But what's interesting is like Warif, he maybe doesn't fully fit in before, but like once he gets out, he really doesn't, because nothing he knows about this new world is at all anything he remembers other than some of his friends, right? But Wagdi has like fill in for him in all of the traditional roles. So there's like a really great line in there about how he had to, how hard it was for him to sit there and take condolences for his best friend's mother and father passing, right? Technically at 2 different times.
Attending the funerals. Yeah.
Right. In his place. Right. Which is a very traditional thing that Warif would do, but Warif is not in, even though he gets out, he's not allowed. He can't physically do it. He's gone mad. And so there's like this, that like Wagdi is very rooted in the traditional, which is to some degree why I think he's not as present in the story as much, because he can just slot himself back in. He goes back to Saud, his wife.
He disappears.
Yet
he comes right back.
And he comes right back.
Warif, who disappears and is gone for 7 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about why Warif went, and a little more about that prison cell. And the prison cell is where a bit of the more fantastical things happen. As well. Yeah, go.
I want to be very clear. I think this book is flirting with the edges of reality, and you described it as surrealist at the very beginning of this, and I would say that is absolutely the case. I think if you were looking for a stable sense of reality in this, you ain't getting it. There are moments where like strange stuff happens, and then later on you read about him literally trying to make himself go insane in prison. And you're like, well, if he succeeded at that, which he does tell us, if to go mad, you can't succeed or fail, which that's a paradox. So, okay. So if he succeeded...
he also wonders about, like, have all these other people succeeded in going mad and we just don't know it?
Right, yeah.
How would you know?
There's a philosophizing, ironically, right? Because I think it's, I forget her name, the Kazakhstani individual.
Yeah, I don't remember her name.
Who says, you're just, don't philosophize, she jokes. And he literally does at multiple points where he's like, okay, well, if you go mad, but like, how would you know that the mad person is mad? Or would you be mad to be able to connect with the madness of the mad person? And like, what if we're all mad and we all can't tell the difference between the mad and the not? But like, there's all these things and you're just sitting here going, then what's real in this book?
The parachutists.
Is that real? I don't know. It's great, though. And it ties right into, like, okay, so, as you say, and I'll let you talk about it because I can ramble, but, right, he there's a thing that he did that got him in prison, which may or may not, have led to the changes. They could be a coincidence, or they could legitimately be the thing that happened, go.
So his crime was that he had two Facebook accounts. One he kept sort of like clean and safe things that he would post, politically safe things. The other one where he'd be more open, kind of like an instant Finsta, I guess.
Yeah.
And so he had his face, but he forgot to sign out of the hidden one, and he posted something under the real one, realized it when he got home, quick deleted it. But then he gets taken by a police officer who confiscates his phone and is looking through all of his Facebook posts and finds the deleted one. And what the post is basically just venting frustration with after working with tourists as a translator, venting frustration over Egyptian bureaucracy and politics, and saying it would just be better if foreigners just came in here and took over running this country, because at least then things would be run well. And then he goes to prison for this, comes out, and indeed, that is what has happened now. Foreigners have come in, taken over the country. His job he's not getting back, because he is the job as translator was taken over by a Polish individual named Jacob that Shaun mentioned earlier.
Which would probably be
or Jakob, yes. Yeah. And so he has lost his job effectively to a foreigner now doing it better.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of like ties into this loss of identity and the loss of uniqueness of Egyptian culture ties into what he was actually arrested for. And there's questions that Mohamed Kheir doesn't really give you an answer of. Was his post really influential in this at all? Or was it a precognition of it? There's some playing around with what's the temporal cause and effect here. Is it some later effect caused his post, or did his post cause it? I mentioned before about the other people who were arrested for this all look exactly like him. Yeah. And wrote very similar kind of posts. And, Yeah,
I think this is where I think like the image that of this, the foreigner taking over Egypt image is really complicated. And I think it defies easy, simplistic explanation. Because if you were just reading this as like a Westerner reading this, and you're just like, well, they're like super white people and they just taken over a not historically super white country, right? They're not dark skinned per se, although there are dark skinned Egyptians, but they're of a lighter skin tone. But they would not be in the West considered white, which is because we're stupid, and there's a whole thing, right? And so if you were reading this from a very simplistic perspective, I think you would take the idea like, white people taking over, and like it's sort of a reversal of the roles, right? Like, isn't it ironic that it's the white people coming in to take all of their jobs? But then Kheir complicates this because, as you'd mentioned at the very beginning of this, right, Warif he's punished by his previous government. But this new bureaucracy isn't punishing him. If anything, they're rewarding him by saying, you don't have to work anymore. We'll give you a stipend, and you can just live the rest of your life doing whatever you want and be done. Which is why I think it's very complicated, because yes, there is the element of these people have come in and they've taken the jobs. In fairness, he's been in prison for 7 years. The book literally asks this, like, did you really expect your job to still be there after 7 years? And then he imagines, like, my chair would be collecting dust for 7 years, and I would dust it off and open the window, which I was fun. But what I'm getting is like this complication that's getting here, where I don't think we get these like very easy racial narratives. We don't get these very easy imperialistic kind of narratives. What we get is just a very complex, as you kind of point out, sense of loss of identity, a loss of uniqueness, and its sort of stilting effect on the people that are in that culture. But it is not even that sounds somewhat too simple for what the book really does, because like Wagdi is still very traditional and is still easily find his place. So I feel like this book is almost like dealing with walls of contradiction, where if we were writing a simpler book, this would just be like, look, all of the like translucent people have taken over the world, and it's a very simple sort of like fascistic or totalitarian type thing, but like the translucent people in this they're not like pure villains. If anything, it's hard to even describe them as villains. They just are. And they're not actively if anything, the previous government is described as villainous because it arrested people for having thoughts, for expressing themselves and their frustrations, as you pointed out. This new government doesn't seem to much care if you express. If anything, Wagyu, who we've not even talked about, his job is coming up with the news of the future.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like expression is so free you can make it up now.
This new regime kind of is like a manifestation of the will of the people.
It is.
Because the will of the people is, or the will of what the will that of frustration that Warif was posting in that Facebook post, right?
Yeah.
Things would just be better if foreigners just came. It's almost like, you rub the genie and it's like, well, careful what you whip, or rub the bottle for the genie, and it's careful what you wish for. Because he wakes up after 7 years,
essentially,
coming out of prison and seeing this manifestation of that wish, right? Yeah. And you have this new bureaucracy that's there implementing it and saying to him, well, isn't this what you wanted? You don't have to work. You don't have to do anything. Other people have come in and they've solved everything. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be run well. We'll give you money. You can live and survive. You don't have to do any work. But that's not fulfilling then, right? So it's almost like an emptiness, looking at changes in Egypt and saying, even when things might get better, is there a cost at the emptiness underlying it?
I mean, I think the book is saying yes, there is a cost.
But I also don't think it's that simple. Like you said, I think it's also about it not being completely that.
Right.
There's this weird dichotomy of optimism and pessimism going throughout this book. One of the things along those lines that I found interesting was the cover of the book. Oh. And so I don't know if you went in and looked of the what this cover is from, but it's a detail from a painting, oil on canvas, I believe, called "Goodbye My Homeland" by Hossam Durar. So I found him on Instagram and found the actual painting. So I put the link for it in our script. Perhaps you can put them in the show notes. But the description of it was that over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time in Europe. In my mind, there's a conflict between all these cultures. So the piece I did for this collection represented all the conflict that I was going through at that time. The black and white painting with abstract movements with streaks of red that symbolized my desire were aimed to reflect my internal conflicts. And the title of it, again, is "Goodbye My Homeland." So when after having read the novel, then looking back at what the cover art was, and that credit inside the cover, my thought was, this is a perfect cover. This is a perfect painting to describe this book, that internal conflict, "Goodbye My Homeland." That pretty much sums up what we were just talking about of what this novel is, I think.
Well, I think it kind of gets to this... so the book has this moment where they go to Alexandria and they note all of the different historical, cultural connections in Alexandria, right? Greek, Roman, obviously there's more ancient cultures than that. And one of the things I think is kind of present in this book, and even suggested in some Durar's quote, is sort of this sense that like all these cultures are sort of intermingling, interconnecting in this space, and it creates conflict is not quite the right word. I mean, there can literally be conflict, right? But there's also all this negotiation that happens. There's sort of an academic concept for this that people talk about called like the palimpsest, where you can see things sort of layered on top of each other, and each of those layers, right? There's not some It's not like you just put the layer on and then it's just there. It's, each one is intermingling and moving in between each other. And yes, you can have sort of violent conflict can be a part of that, but you can also have like melding of cultures and change over time, which to some degree I think is what this book is kind of about. And I think it's actually the thing I was saying before our thing cut out on us, which is that this book is like about the conflicting sense of what change does. And where change is good, but it's also scary, especially at a societal level. Change can be beautiful and it can introduce new things, but it can also make you lose things. And those are things like ancient cities in particular have had to deal with like their entire existence because they've been around, literally, like Cairo has been around thousands of years, right? Or maybe not like modern Cairo, but like the area of Cairo, right? And if you go to Cairo, right? There's all kinds of ancient civilization that's been here. There's that palimpsest is building. And I think in some ways this book suggests that this is, I don't know if claustrophobic's the word, because I think the claustrophobia comes from his 1 meter by 1.5 meter prison cell, which is just so small. It's a prison, so I get it. But also, yeah. But it does feel like it can be at times suffocating, which I think is... I just don't think when I read this book that he has these panic attacks, I don't read them as again, going back to the idea that this book is not simple and the answers for things are not as simple as one thing. It's not just because he was in prison. It's not just because horrible things happened to him in prison and he went mad. It's also like that suffocating overwhelm, kind of where we were at the very beginning of this, of being in a world that has changed and having to adjust to that. He's going through a more extreme version than Sally is or Wagdi is, because he's been in prison for 7 years and he comes out to this and he didn't even see any of the change happen, right? It just did. But I think that that's part of where those panic attacks are manifesting. He's going into spaces that used to be other things. He's entering spaces that used to be one way but are slightly different, or in some cases dramatically different. And he's having like this weird... He says at one point that his memories, he seems to have like deliberately tried to get rid of them, but they're not gone, really. He has the memories. He has the feeling and the tactile sensation of them. And some of his panic attacks are like caused by having a memory of a thing, and the thing he's experiencing is not the same as his memory. And there's like a disconnect in his brain, and then he freaks out.
Because the madness, part of the going mad is, I think he puts it, wanting to conquer time.
Yeah!
Which one understands, which I've already mentioned how funny things happen with time in this novel at various points, right? But if you're in prison, stuck in this small, tiny cell, time is going to be an issue for you, right? Like wanting to conquer that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then when he gets out, he still has this fear of time. Particularly, he has a fear of the future, right? Yeah. He fears or has difficulty with the possibilities. He's always looking back to these memories, uncertain about what is to come. He's looking for the job he had 7 years ago. He's looking for the relationships that he had before, the parents that that are gone, that he didn't really have a chance to say goodbye to. He has been taken out of time and is now put back in time and doesn't want to deal with still being in time. Does that make sense? Like he wants to just continue, his mind wants to continue living in the past from a position where he doesn't have to go through time almost anymore. He can just live in that past or remember that past in a way.
Fortunately, you can't do that.
No.
No. Time is a cruel mistress. She will creep up on you, and I mean,
harsher than gravity.
It is harsher than gravity. Yeah, I think you're right though that time is all of the thing. I mean, time is literally change, right? Like it is the manifestation of change in the fundamental nature of reality, like the fabric of reality. Everything is changing through time, and it's just unfortunately for him, he has he has lost time in the sense of like literally lost very significant moments in a life that one would have, but he also can't, I think you're correct in pointing out, he's afraid of coming into the present and going into what will come next, which will be the future, which is why
I think the final lines give some hope.
Yeah.
That maybe he is okay with jumping into that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. You have to read it on your own because I'm not going to read them. Yeah. No. Yeah, no, I don't want to give the impression that this book is like super depressing. I mean, there's aspects of it that are, and certainly the book is in moments sad and melancholy, and there's sort of elements that are very sort of totalitarian, talking about sort of the history of sort of the politics of Egypt, which has had some very substantial turmoil in its modern history. And there's those dark things here, but then there's also sort of seemingly very normal activities like spending time with people and experiencing the world. Even there's moments where he's just describing experiences with birds, that are...
There's a lot of wonderment.
Yes.
Sort of like observing and just existing, and wonderment with life and of existing, I think.
Yeah. I think that this is a book that's just sort of moves between these. It just doesn't want to be one very specific, very simple answer to all of these different things. And that's part of what I really, really, really love. This is my final thought, by the way, that this is what I love about this book, is it isn't just giving us a very neatly packaged answer to the questions that it raises. Some of the answers, there are some neat answers in here, and some of those answers are just very messy. And to be frank, that's kind of reality, right? That this is just, the answers aren't black and white. Sometimes they're very complicated. This is why like philosophers have been like writing for literally generation upon generation upon generation, trying to make sense of this reality we all live in, and how do we make something good out of it. This is why like when you like talk about the concept of the good life, nobody knows what you're talking about, because that concept is so fuzzy. And it's because that's the world we live in. The world is not, in rare cases, certainly more black and white, but in general, it's just not. It's a very complex mishmash, and how we deal with that sense of conflict that the very nature of existence presents to us, I think, is somewhat what this book is just trying to convey through a very specific lens, I should say, obviously. So, more books like this, please. It's so good.
Yes. So that would be my final thought, I guess, is please give this book a try. Two Lines Press. They put out a lot of wonderful stuff. And also check out Slipping by Mohamed Kheir. Another excellent novel.
I want it. Yeah, I'm a Kheir fan. This is really, really good. Yeah. So, okay. Well, I guess we have to stop talking.
We have a show, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, folks. If you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, or you read the book and you want to let us know what you thought about it, email at skiffyfanty@gmail.com, or if you're a Patreon supporter, you can obviously go to the Discord. We got people in there right now talking about episodes that have just come out and sharing their thoughts about interesting things that happened in those, and you can do that. So you can find us on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, a bunch of places. Those are all at skiffyfanty.com/skiffythings. We are live every Friday at 7 p.m. Central on Twitch for our live format. That's at twitch.tv/Alphabet Streams, which is my personal channel. And then if you like what we do, there are a bunch of different ways. Tell people about it. Share our stuff on the socials. Leave us reviews on your favorite podcast apps. Apple Podcasts is like the big boy in town, so those are definitely nice, but I know that's a pain in the butt to like go into that whole system and leave reviews. But if you do it, extra appreciation from me. I know this from having recently done it, and it was obnoxious, but I did want it known what I thought about a show. And then obviously you can support us at not Skiffy and Fanty. Well, you can support us there too, skiffyandfanty.com, but patreon.com/skiffyandfanty, where you can join for as little as $1 and get a bunch of free podcasts and all kinds of cool stuff. Speaking of Patreon supporters, we have a crap load of them that we would like to thank. So Andrea the Alluring, Cameron the Chthonic, I can never say that word, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Culture, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Jen the Jabberwocky, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, and Karen the Kickass.
Kat the Kinematic, Matthew the Magnificent, Paul the Pious, Phoebe the Eloquent, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A. the Sensational, Sarah E. the Sublime, Sarah O. the Rapturous, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Tari the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant.
And also it's Tari.
Tari, okay.
Because that's my mom.
Tari the Thorough. Oh.
Sorry. Sorry. You don't feel guilty about it. I just know this because every time my mom, when I was growing up, would have to tell people how to say her name, she'd be like, it's like Marie. Yeah.
That makes total sense.
So it's not about you. Anyway, it's my mom. Anyway, thanks everybody. So you can find me, ShaunDuke.net, ShaunDuke.net/DukeThings if you want to find my socials. And then I am here Wednesdays. Presently, for the next couple of weeks, we'll be doing a Cats the Conspiracy TTRPG actual play at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays, but normally it would be 6 p.m. would be when I would do those things. And then Sundays at 6 p.m. Central will be when I do my Valheim streams.
You can find me, Daniel, at the Skiffy and Fanty blog or at reading1000lives.com, at reading1000lives on Blue Sky.
Perfect. And on that note, I got to make it happy as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws. And so, you know what? Honestly, small presses are really nice, and they do some really, really great work. And we've been very fortunate to have very nice small presses send us books that honestly are probably not cheap for them to send. And so, yay, small presses. Please show love to your small presses.
Amen to that.
Yeah, and on that note, happy ending and see you.